Hi, it's John, and welcome to the channel. It is Friday, July the 18th. I hope you're having a great start to your Friday. I've got my big blue mug of coffee, which disappears. Isn't that cool? It disappears when I bring it on screen. Hope you're having a great start to your Friday today. And I am recording this on Thursday. I don't ask any guests I have on my channel to get up real early in the morning to record videos. So it is Thursday when I'm doing this. And I've made it quite clear I'm very appreciative of what a lot of independent media do on YouTube. The people who consider themselves YouTube and are having dialogue and discussion about Canadian politics that aren't part of the legacy media. I appreciate what they do. I wish I could have done it when I was a broadcaster, when I started in the mid 80s. And certainly I would be doing that now full time as opposed to being on a radio station. I certainly could reach a lot more people and probably make a lot more money doing it. And I watch a lot of people on here who have different points of view. And one of the ones I watch on a regular basis is a fellow Albertan. I think he lived in Calgary at one time. I believe he lives just west of Edmonton these days. He talks about Canadian politics, Alberta politics. He talks about municipal politics as well. Talks about the independence movement here in Alberta and has a very keen political mind as far as I'm concerned. One of the best at what he does on a regular basis, on a daily basis. He's a 7-time best-selling author. He's a full-time father, a YouTube creator. His name is Derek Smith, but you know him as the Unacceptable Fringe. I guess I'm joining the Fringe today. Derek, thank you for joining me on the channel. I appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, John, for having me on the channel. It's good to be here.
Well, it is really a pleasure. And I believe you live west of Edmonton now. Is that correct? I think you've mentioned, is it Spruce Grove you live in?
Yeah, my wife and I, we've known each other since high school. We actually grew up together in Calgary. I lived there for 30 years, but we needed to expand our family, and Spruce Grove, smaller town life, just seemed to be the place for us. So
yeah,
we headed up northwest, I guess you could say.
Yeah, well, I introduced you as a 7-time best-selling author, full-time father, and YouTube creator. It's a lot of hats to have. I mean, certainly the full-time father thing, but I'm a great admirer of you and of what you do on YouTube. I'm really amazed at the independent creators these days. It's just amazing to me. Let me just tell you something. There's a little bit of, this is remarkable to think. I was in radio broadcasting, Derek, for 35 years. And in March, I had more people watch me on YouTube than would have watched me or heard me in 35 years on the radio. By a
It's
long
funny you
shot.
say that.
By a long shot.
It seems to be the soapbox platform these days for those who want to get their voice heard. If they're consistent, if they've got the right formula, it's social media is really an amazing tool that, 20 years ago, if people wanted to start out and be seen or be heard, it couldn't happen.
No.
It's how would you get the word out aside from a friend of a friend of a friend? Social media has bloomed into almost a juggernaut that just overtook media, that overtook television, the reason you see all these streaming services now, the reason you see radios struggling to find sponsors to continue their typical broadcast format is that people have moved on to another medium, and this seems to be it. I often get asked, why don't you go to this platform? Why don't you do that? I always say, well, those things are all fine and dandy, but this is where the eyeballs seem to be these days. So this is where we make our stake.
I certainly, if I started in the mid 80s in radio broadcasting, and if I were starting today, I would not be in legacy media. I look at Jasmine Lane. I think she made her story quite public, but she lost her job in radio, was devastated, and now she's doing far better just doing YouTube. So good for her.
Absolutely.
And the other people I follow as well, like Moose on the Loose. I'm just stunned at how amazing people like yourself and they're just doing incredible things. I just can't believe the amount of information I get. Now, I wanted to talk to you about this later. I want to get to federal politics. I want to get to provincial politics. We'll talk about Pierre Poilievre a little bit, Mark Carney and whatnot. But we did start off this way. I've heard you say on your channel that you're concerned about censorship. You're concerned about your voice being silenced. Are you still feeling that way? And are you waiting for the axe to fall with the Carney government?
It's not just my voice. I'm concerned about everybody's voice falling, essentially. When you look at the censorship laws that Mark Carney is pushing forward, it's not just YouTube. It's the way that it's constructed and you can always tell when liberals are lying because they're moving their mouths, or well, typically
Yeah.
any politician for that matter.
Mhm.
They constantly use the words that, oh, this isn't what you think it is, or it's not going to be used the way that people are saying it's going to be used. It's drawn up in a way that states, well, we don't want online hate. We don't want people being berated online or harassed. And I do agree that social media is a bit of the Wild West when it
Mhm.
comes to what they put up with. And again, I see kids go through it, especially my kids. You see what adolescents go through on social media. And I agree that that end of abuse shouldn't be tolerated. God only knows. Go into anybody's YouTube comment section. I'm sure you'll see
Mhm.
plenty of abuse.
Yeah.
But what the government essentially has lined up is ways to say you can't criticize the government via the rules that we're bringing in. And I think that free speech goes so far. And a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what free speech means. Can you attack and berate somebody? No. But you should have a voice to criticize those that you're giving a mandate
Yeah.
to, those that are in power.
I think I'm kind of an absolutist this way, other than calling for violence against somebody. You should be able to say anything because I think that speech is a great way to expose people. I mean, people who are hateful, you don't want them hiding like cockroaches in the dark. You'd rather them speak out and then you speak, and then you know where they are and you can find them. Speaking the truth, there's nothing wrong with that. But as long as you're not calling for violence, I often say that liberals, you can't spell liberal without L-I-and-E, but they cloak up their censorship in we're protecting children. And then if you vote against it, you're not for protecting children, but they're
Yes.
hiding the other stuff in behind. If you say something or somebody perceives you might say something in the future, it's that Orwellian now. If you say something, somebody thinks you might say something in the future, you can end up going to jail for God's sakes, or having an ankle bracelet, or or getting fined. It just stuns me that that's where we are in this country now.
Well, it's funny you mention it like that, because one of the things I meant to bring up in my last point was, when you look at what you mentioned with YouTube, the internet, how people are able to gain a platform these days. I think a lot of this stems from situations like the Freedom Convoy, that you see a grassroots movement that, got together through online methods, became the size that it was, and then all of a sudden they get to Ottawa, and the government that called them a small fringe minority on the way up, thinking this is nothing, saw the line of trucks pour in, and just how effective social media can be, especially when it came to crowdfunding, when it came to raising the millions of dollars that are now sitting in escrow. I think what the government is doing now is saying, okay, people are able to band together. They're able to form underneath social media. So we need to get a cap on that. So that, again, if you speak out about the government, well, we'll freeze your bank accounts. We'll lock you down. We can send you to jail. We can shut you up. We don't want pressure from those who disagree with us. And that essentially in any country is where I'd have any problem, not just in Canada.
Yeah, the misinformation that the government talks so much, it continues to spread out there. I saw somebody this morning talking about Poilievre, who just gets hammered on X and social media these days. I don't know why the left hates him so much, but saying Pierre Poilievre supported the convoy that wanted to overthrow the government of Canada, and this is the kind of stuff you hear all the time. And regarding the convoy, I mean, it's just a lot of people who wanted their rights that are written down in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to just go to work during COVID. That's what it was really about, and it was one of the most amazing things that went worldwide in the country. But the government had to shut up these people, and it all could have ended if Trudeau would have just spoken to Tamara Leach and sat down with her, and it would have ended. But
What's
they now
funny about
use it
that,
against the right?
nobody spoke to them is the problem, right?
No.
So and that shows you that anytime the government wants to say, well, it was an attack on Ottawa, you had all these trucks on the government's front lawn. All you had to do was go outside and hear what your citizens had to say. They would have left. And again, shame on the government. I mean, it all falls back to them. And that's what people should be focusing on, is not, well, we agree or disagree with the beliefs of the convoy. The question is, you still haven't answered it or addressed it. Why didn't you sit down with those who were willing to talk with you?
Never let a good crisis go to waste, right? And that's
Never.
What they've been using it ever since. And of course, the lawfare against the people involved continues to this day. When it comes to Pierre Poilievre, did you get unhinged hatred for him online because it is unbelievable now that he's running in here in Alberta in a by-election not too long from now. Do you get why they hate him so much?
I will say that after the election, there was almost like this falling out. And I think it started with juggernauts like the pleb who were following Pierre around the country, really getting people hyped and saying, look, we've got it. It's coming.
Mm-hmm.
New leadership. I think that it wasn't really necessarily on Poilievre. I think that people just felt hope was gone. People thought this is, going to be a change of government. He had such momentum that I think it was the blowback of reality that, hey, are we ever going to have a change of government? Are we ever going to be in control? I think that when you look at Albertans right now that push the blowback on Pierre, it's because they're frustrated. A lot of Albertans didn't want to talk about things like independence, but now they're hosting those topics simply because they feel trapped. They feel that, look, a small percentage of a small portion of land in the country decides who's in power. Quebec has their boot on our neck when it comes to transfer payments, when it comes to how we're treated. So they're asking Pierre, and I've asked the question to much scrutiny, even if you were to become prime minister at this point, when we see what's happening with Alberta independence, when we look at the value of freedom, when we look at everything else, what deal could we possibly get from the federal government that would be better than Alberta independence? And they've opened the doors to that. I will scrutinize that Pierre did play it a little safe. I feel personally that, one thing a lot of people tend to bring up is that he had a massive lead over Justin Trudeau. And he focused during the federal election on Donald Trump rather than immigration, rather than major issues that Canadians were concerned about. And I do understand in the same light, before anybody in your audience wants to get upset, the problem is, again, our federal elections. It's the vote, the per capita vote. We need electoral reform. The votes in Alberta have no stake in the game. Pierre has to balance his platform on Torontonians, on Southern Ontario voters, on Quebec. And as long as he has to focus his campaigns around that, you're going to see these quote unquote woke issues be at the center of every election until the Liberal government decides, here's the new hot topic, we're going to pivot.
Do you think he's going to win his riding? I think he'll win. It's a very safe conservative riding. Do you think he'll survive leadership review, which is coming up in January? Do you think he can gain enough votes to win an election in the future? I think it was bad timing. I mean, it's just awful timing for him. I mean, if you look at the beginning of January, this was a supermajority conservative government, and it just went poof like a fart in the wind.
I think he will win. I don't see any reason why not. Again, it is a strong conservative riding. However, what shocks me, and again, to the disdain of people that kind of just died out on the flame of Pierre after the election, is just how quickly that riding has said they're not happy with what Damien Carrick did. And again, I'm hearing a lot of it because I'm close to that riding. Yeah. And there's a lot of locals talking about it. And it's people that I know that live in that riding have said, I just feel that, with Damien Carrick, we had representation. We had somebody whose office I could call, and if I had problems, they'd pick up the phone. Once Pierre gets elected, he goes back to Ottawa, and it's the same situation as Carleton, where maybe he doesn't put boots on the ground in a while, and we don't hear from him. Where's our representation in our riding? So there are people with valid concerns, but at the same time, I think the support for Pierre is still quite strong. It is a very conservative focused riding that I think Pierre will probably end up around 60% of the vote. That's my prediction. But even if they get 60% of the vote for his party, I would take that as a fail. I would take that as a wake up call because, again, you're running in Alberta of all places. Yeah. If you can't get 70, 80, 85% of the vote, take it as a fail and really start to analyze, okay, so it's not just Carleton, it's not just Ontario and, riding switching with more, government workers in it. People are generally upset. What do we have to do moving forward to gain the trust back of Canadians, to get more support from those who have turned away? Again, his people are really smart. I think that they've got this, but and I've often said I think Pierre's still the best person for the job. So I hope it all goes through. But I always say it's never over until election day. So we'll see what happens.
I've said he could be the greatest prime minister that never was our prime minister, that never happened. You know,
Absolutely.
I met him. I know you've met him many times, I'm sure. I met him for the first time. Guy Lauzon, he was the MP for Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry, which covered
Hmm.
Cornwall, Ontario, and Eastern Ontario. He passed away recently, Guy. Eric Duncan replaced him
Hmm.
and is an MP right now, a Conservative. And Guy was in town to do a speech, I think, at the Chamber of Commerce at the time. And it was a few years after Poilievre was elected for the first time, because Guy was elected for the first time around the same time as Poilievre, I think 2004, right around there. And he introduced me to Poilievre and said, John, I'd like to introduce you to a future prime minister of the country. And I thought for sure it was going to happen in this election, and it hasn't happened. Then again, he could be one of the greatest comebacks in history. Do you think that the Liberal voters who are so invested in Mark Carney at this point are going to catch on to what's going on, or are they just so brainwashed into this elbows up thing that we've been hearing about for months?
I don't even think it's just that crowd. I think it's a bigger problem. I think that you
Mm-hmm.
have titans in business, you have those of influence. They don't like Pierre's platform of cutting government spending. You think about defunding the CBC, all the things Pierre was talking about was
Mm-hmm.
bad for shareholders in some degree. So I think that, you know, I agree he could be the greatest prime minister that never was. And it's funny because, you know, when he reached out to me recently to talk about, you know, support that was given during the federal election,
Yeah.
what his plans are for the future, you know, I told him on the phone, I said, I don't see Mark Carney as the prime minister candidate. I said, you're my prime minister, whether you're in that office or not. You know, I voted for you. I think that you've still got what it takes, and now's the time to really look at what needs to be done to get into that seat. Now, albeit, you know, like you said, the Liberal voters tend to really control what happens in our elections. So
Mm-hmm.
I really don't envy Pierre one bit to try and have to analyze and figure out how do I win them over to the point where we can actually get into office. But I mean, your guess is as good as mine. That's why, again, I stay clearly away from that argument, because if I were Pierre and they said, "What are we going to do?" I'd say, "I don't know. I have
Yeah,
no
well,
idea."
I've thought about him quite a bit. I went to Spruce Meadows when he's running for the leadership. I saw
Yeah.
him. I saw him when he was in town just prior to the election. I went out to the airport to see that, which was just astounding. And
Yeah.
then he lost, and I was thinking, what is this guy thinking? I mean, you've got to have, pardon the expression, but balls of steel to walk out in front of the media and have to stare down the media after you got beaten when you were expected to win just 5 months ago. I mean, just and a huge win just 5 months ago.
Well, and I think that was the disappointment of people, was that you saw such a gain, but what a lot of people tend to forget with that gain is that was a gain under Justin Trudeau. People looked at Mark Carney coming in, and for Liberals, that was enough. If you watch Rebel News's coverage when they went through Nepean and were talking to a number of people about what was going on, and the articles coming out saying that Mark Carney's folks and the Liberals had already strategized to use Donald Trump as the
Yeah.
talking points of the election in advance. They had a clear strategy. A lot of people in Ontario and across Canada have what's referred to as Trump derangement syndrome. It's an easy win if you can keep people focused
Mhm.
on the bad guy. And what I often say is that uh, the American president really doesn't have a lot of influence as to what happens in Canada. What people should have focused on was policy, policy, policy. And instead, we got wrapped into American politics for a month, and it cost Pierre the election.
So, what about Mark Carney? What do you expect from him? I mean, I've been saying since the beginning of the year, and I knew about him years ago. Certainly, he was announced, I think, about last September as an economic advisor, sort of for Trudeau at that point. But he'd been around for about 5 years at that point. I knew his background with the Bank of England, Bank of Canada, of course, and things like that. I knew he was a net zero guy. And I still haven't, I think he's there, the net zero guy, but I don't think that's really been unleashed on the Canadian public as much as we've thought. He's keeping EV mandates, he's keeping carbon taxes on industrial. He's still about net zero. What do you expect from him? I don't think he's for pipelines either, and I don't think it's going to be good for Alberta.
Well, it's never going to be good for Alberta. In fact, what I
Yeah,
think is that when you look at the deficit Mark Carney's been entertaining, one
92
of the
billion
things
this
I've
year. Yeah,
yeah, so one
yeah,
thing that I've entertained on my channel is you look at the only province that's posted a surplus this year is Alberta. That worries me when you think back to the 80s and the National Energy Program, that we could see something similar coming to Alberta where, hey, we got to make up those deficits. Let's just tax oil and gas a little bit further. The problem with that is that it's only going to push independence further at that point. I think another national energy program would cripple the
yeah.
thought of staying a part of Canada. But that being said, what I would expect from Mark Carney is exactly what he outlines in his book Values. If anybody hasn't read it yet, I would highly recommend going to check it out. Don't buy it. Go to a library.
Yeah.
There's no sense in giving Mark any more money.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I go back always to the warning issued on Donald Trump's inauguration day by former PM Liz Truss, who said, he bankrupted the Bank of England. He's going to do the same thing in Canada. This is the pattern with Mark Carney. To quote Kevin O'Leary, follow the money. Anytime you look at the policies that Mark Carney is putting in place, when you look at his conflicts of interest, when you look at the typical liberal behavior of padding the pockets of friends, Mark Carney sat in an interview several months before the election and said that while he was advising Trudeau pro bono, he understands that the advisements he gives pushes profits for shareholders and policy pushes profits. This is what you're going to see moving forward, is Mark Carney looking at how do we get rich and then get out. It's anybody who thinks Mark Carney's here to help Canadians is completely off base. They need to follow the money. Again, like you mentioned earlier, David Moose on the Loose, he has done an unbelievable job
That's
following Mark's investments
the
with his chart.
graph and chart he's got is just astounding, and it's like the spider's web of connections, even to Jared Kushner,
Yeah.
Donald Trump's son-in-law, Donald Trump himself. It's just remarkable. And
Well, and
again,
what's funny is you see David doing that, and he doesn't get the budget of the CBC
yeah,
or any of those investigative journalists. So when you hear about the millions of dollars going out to the CBC, that should be a definite red flag for anybody to say, well, this guy can do it on a shoestring budget. How come we're paying millions of dollars for the CBC to give us propaganda?
I watch on a daily basis, and you're probably one of them. People who get more hits and more views than the CBC does. It's just
Well,
astounding.
and the CBC was already gloating that they took down Real Talk Politics over that just
Yeah.
after the election, that, oh, they got more views than us. So let's, send a nice little email to YouTube or Google and see what they can do to have that removed.
Right.
Now, whether that had the influence or not is not for me to say, but the fact that their article came out to be gloating definitely didn't help their case.
I think, the CBC thing, I remember when he was here, I think he said it at Spruce Meadows. He certainly said it when he was at the airport, defund the CBC. I think that hurt. I don't like that they're actually even funding the legacy media, the I guess not the public media, the private media. I mean, I used to work in it, and you can't have credibility if the government is paying you, and the only way you
Absolutely.
keep your job. So I hate that. I just hate it. And again, people on YouTube are doing better than the CBC and doing better work as well. And again, Moose on the Loose is pretty remarkable, and Jasmine Lane and yourself as well. So
That.
we've got no deal when it comes to Donald Trump. I did a video this morning, and I don't think Carney ever expected to get a deal with Donald Trump. How are you feeling about that right now? There's the tariffs are still in, although I saw an article today, I think it popped up on the National Post for a few minutes, that talks might be back on again. I don't know.
Well, if the talks are back on, it's because Donald knows what he's getting, and that's the thing that a lot of people
Yeah.
need to look at when watching Carney and Trump. Whether you look at Moose's connections to Trump and Kushner and everything else, it's completely irrelevant. What you have to look at, and what I've noticed after 20 plus years of working in the business field and sitting in negotiations with larger companies, is just you read Donald Trump's Art of the Deal, and this is exactly where Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau, as well as other Liberal delegates, have failed when it comes to sitting at the table with Donald Trump. They've shown their cards. They've always folded. It goes back as far as Trudeau going to Mar-a-Lago and Trump asking what would happen if we cut ties with Canada in terms of the finances that we give, and Trudeau says, well, we'd fold. you just put your cards on the table to say we have nothing to negotiate with. He goes back and sends Jolie and others down to deal with Donald Trump, and they start saying, well, look, we want to talk about, dairy cartels. We want to talk about lumber, and we want to talk about other, industries that we can benefit with Canada. And Trump already knows they don't have any power at the table. Mark Carney goes down there and he says, well, we're going to bring in the digital services tax. We're going to bring in all these other things. Trump says more sweeping tariffs. Carney folds.
Yeah.
As soon as Carney folds, well, then Trump knows all I have to do is threaten tariffs and I get what I want. So if negotiations are back on, it just means more bad news for Canada. I say what Mark Carney should do at this point, if I were Mark Carney, and of course, not that it's good, is take the tariffs, find a way to get around them in terms of rebuilding Canada's wealth, and stop negotiating. Every time he goes to the table, it's just showing Donald, we'll come right back and you can keep abusing us as long as you want to.
Well, let me ask you about that. Let's pivot over to Alberta now. Danielle Smith, certainly, I guess it was early December, probably around December 10th, when Trudeau sat down with the premiers, except for Danielle Smith. I believe she was in Washington at the time, I think right around that time, trying to be diplomatic, get some tariffs dropped. I believe she got tariffs dropped on oil down to 10% as opposed to 25%. I can't recall if that is still in place, but perhaps. Danielle Smith, what do you make of her right now? Certainly she's made it easier for the independence movement with this vote. I think she's well liked in the province. I think she's the toughest politician in the whole country. Where do you think she stands on this? She's made demands of Mark Carney, 9 different things, including Bill C-69, the pipelines law, C-48, the tanker ban. How do you think she plays into this? Are we going to get a pipeline because Danielle Smith is demanding it, or is this a power play by her? There's a lot there. Maybe you can unpack it.
I think if we're going to get a pipeline, it's going to be strictly to benefit the government. Again, nothing is to benefit Albertans. When I refer back to what I say about, my fears of a possible National Energy Program 2.0, I think that's the only way we would see a pipeline coming into Alberta. The problem with Danielle's demands, and somebody brought it up at the Alberta Next panel in Red Deer, was that until Danielle puts her feet in the ground against Ottawa and says enough is enough, she doesn't necessarily have to stoke the flames of independence, but she has to state a very clear threat that Alberta can leave, that enough is enough, that her constituents have had enough. Not necessarily her, she's willing to negotiate. You're never going to have a premier who's going to outright flip and say, okay, independence all the way, unless she's given that mandate. And she's stated very frankly that if a citizen-led initiative pushes for independence, she will back what her constituents ask, which I give her a lot of credit for. I do think Danielle is the greatest premier that this province has had since Ralph Klein. I think that she's doing tremendous strides in terms of representation. Again, anybody who wants to argue, oh, Danielle's a Fed, she's not helping us, I always say,
she's a traitor.
Tell me another,
she's been called. Yeah.
Tell me another premier that works as hard as she does and that's willing to actually stand up for what her citizens need. I think she's doing a tremendous job. She's always got my vote for as long as she continues on the path that she is. I think that she cares about Albertans, and it's the same feeling I get with Pierre Poilievre. I've spoken to both of them personally, and they're good people when they're off camera, and they generally care about who they represent. And I think that when you have somebody like Danielle faced with the decisions that she has to make, of course she wants diplomacy. Of course she wants, Canada to remain Canada. Who doesn't? None of us want to leave. And I've often argued that when you talk about independence, people aren't spitting on a flag. They're not leaving Canada. They're leaving their federal government. They're leaving the abuse. Right. How long are we supposed to take it for? I think Danielle poses the same kind of initiative when she says, look, I'm going to continue to negotiate for a fair and free Canada, but if we don't get it, there's other options on the table. I commend her for that. And I do agree with her being in the United States trying to negotiate deals, because it's not about the drama. It's not about Trump versus Carney or any of that. It's about what's going to hurt people's bottom dollar. And whether tariffs come in or not, tariffs don't just hurt Canadians. They're going to hurt American jobs as well. So Danielle, of course, taking the diplomacy route, I commend her for that. I think she's doing a fantastic job.
Are Albertans pissed off enough to vote for independence? There are enough of them?
I think so. So I think what it's really going to come down to is nostalgia for some people. Again, I think a lot of people hold on to what Canada used to be.
I call it
And
patriotism. Patriotism. It's a hard thing to fight against, Eric.
yeah,
Patriotism. I'm a Canadian. I have that identity. I wrap myself in the flag. I mean, I used to
yeah.
have it as well. I got a tattoo that's got a maple leaf on it. I'm going to get it covered with the Alberta flag now. I've changed my mind, but patriotism's hard to fight against, isn't it?
It's funny because, you know, I was actually speaking with a neighbor about it the other day because they found out who I am and asked about my views. And I said, look, what it boils down to for me, and what I think it's going to boil down to for a lot of Albertans that are still on the fence, and this is one of the reasons I'm glad that the Value of Freedom was published. People started saying, well, what do we gain? What do we? Yeah,
You
there it
see
is.
it?
There,
It's here, but it's getting hidden.
it's
Yeah,
there,
I've
but
got
getting
it in my.
blacked out.
Anyway, I'm
It's
sorry.
an amazing, incredible document, and
Yes.
it's very, very good in terms of the figures and how accurate it is. I think for a lot of Albertans, when they start to see what they have to gain, it's not a matter of patriotism anymore. It's a matter of what's the best future for other generations. The question I often ask with three kids in my house is, when are they ever going to be able to afford a home? When are they ever going to be able to get a good, well-paying job that they're not competing with millions of migrants coming over to work for less? It's we need a fair shake, and the federal government doesn't want to give it to us. If we have an out, as much as I don't want to take that out, I think it's the best thing in terms of prosperity. And it's going to come down to patriotism versus prosperity, I think, in the long run. For anybody who's struggling to pay their rent, buy a home, pay their mortgage, put food on the table, pay high utility bills, I think those things are going to have a huge effect on how someone thinks going to a vote. I think that you're going to have those who qualify to vote who have maybe only been in Alberta or been in Canada for so long that they have a love for a country that gave them a new opportunity,
Mhm.
that you may see people pull back. Again, I always say it's down to voting day, election day. I think there's a strong enough push, and you can see that at the APP meetings. You can see that now at the Alberta Next panels. Red Deer was packed to the brim.
Yeah.
As soon as Jeff Rath spoke up, people were applauding. The guy who said we got to go to Ottawa and tell them enough is enough, people were astoundingly applauding on that one. So
Watch your video this morning. I watched it. Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing, isn't it?
I think you've
Yeah.
got a lot of support that, you know, 10 years ago, if you talked about Alberta leaving, you might get one or two people going, yeah, it might be a good idea. Whereas nowadays, I hear it everywhere. I haven't heard a single person tell me they want to stay. Again, I'm in a more conservative area,
Mhm.
so I would expect to hear that.
Yeah.
Again, APP event in Spruce Grove was packed as well. But I think what it's going to come down to is the municipalities. I think what APP should be doing, and other organizations that are pushing independence, is focus on meetings within those municipalities to show the numbers, show the benefits. If they want an independence vote, you're going to have to win over, I would think, somewhere to 100,000 to 250,000 votes between the two cities. For Edmonton, your guess is as good as mine because they typically vote with the unions and
Yes.
with the government. However, you know, some of the unions are now touting, hey, this could be beneficial based on funding options. Again, everything's up in the air until we see more of these panels, until we see more people getting vocal. I do think that the focus needs to be on municipalities, though, if we want to get that vote.
You mentioned prosperity. People ask me why I want Alberta independence. I say I would like to. I think we get disrespected in Alberta. I think it's a racket now. I think we're just a bank account for them. And I'm sick and tired of Alberta having to get down on its knees to beg the Liberal Party and Mark Carney and the people in the East for its prosperity. It drives me crazy. I think Danielle Smith has said maybe $120 billion in lost investment. That doesn't include the revenue we could have got out of the ground. You can imagine how much more money we would have had if all that investment would have happened. I'm running a bit short on time here because I've got to upgrade my Zoom, and it's telling me I've got about 4 minutes left right now. Let me just ask you, how long have you been doing the YouTube thing? And you're a full-time dad. Are you doing this full-time right now?
Yeah, so YouTube, ultimately what happened is my wife was in the oil and gas sector.
Hmm.
Um, YouTube was a hobby for me. It was just a way to stay relevant in between books.
Yeah.
And as it grew, it became where my interest lied. And I enjoy doing YouTube.
Mm.
Um, the cost of daycare is out of control. So I stayed home while my wife was working because I'd be essentially working just to give my money to a daycare with 3 kids. So YouTube is my full-time job. And a lot of people think I say it's my job because I like the money. It's just, no, it's the situation we're in right now. And if it pays me anything, that's my job. So unfortunately, when we moved, my wife was offered a transfer and then it was denied when we moved. So now YouTube literally is my full-time job
Well,
until she finds something else. But I enjoy it, and I've been doing it for roughly 2.5 years, and I love every minute of it. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
and you're very successful doing it. You know, I kind of kicked off my YouTube channel in December. It was incredible way through the election. I picked up people. I started at 400 people, and I've got close to 35,000. I'm pretty pleased with it. I maybe shoot a video a day, have a lot of time, a lot of fun doing it. I don't do this full time at
Mhm.
all. I make a little bit of money doing it as well. But you're really good at what you do. I
I
want to
appreciate
talk
that.
again. I have so many other things I'd like to chat with you about. I hope we can do it again. I hope this can be a series because I'd like to talk to people
Sure.
like Moose on the Loose, Jasmine Lane, get you on the air on a more regular basis because I love chatting with people here. I think people enjoy it as well. And we appreciate what you do as a YouTuber, as a full-time father, and a 7-time best-selling author. We'll put some links in the description so people can find all that for you as well, your
Great.
social media. Thank you so much for this today. It was a great pleasure for me.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you for having me on. I like the work you do too, John. Keep it up, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one. There is a big blue mug there somewhere.